So, I'm going to be honest, I was a little bit worried for episode 7 of Andor. We've had 6 really strong episodes that rounded out an entire story arc, and I think that story arc concluded brilliantly last week. But I had my concerns that maybe now this is where things will start to go downhill, but I'm really glad to say that it is not the case. Although it is essentially a bridge episode, it's an exceptional one that does a lot to actually move a lot of the character motivations forward. And what it also does, which is really difficult, is that it doesn't feel like filler, which is a hard thing to do with a bridge episode like this. As always, there are some spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. Now, the episode starts with Cyril. However, despite the fact that I thought he was very well portrayed in the first few episodes, they're just spending a little bit more time to build upon that negative relationship that Cyril has with his mother, and he's preparing for a job interview, getting lambasted by her, again showcasing that extreme tension between him and her, and allowing us to kind of ascertain his relationship with her, and his upbringing, and why he is the way he is. But this beginning in of its own kind of sets the foundations for the whole episode. It is another episode where dialogue trumps all. We move over to the Imperial Security Bureau, and they're essentially discussing the robbery on Aldhani and how they're now basically going to get really serious with the law. And you can feel the tension here. And that is something that's been very consistent in this show so far, is the tension that they are managing to consistently build. The rebels have done something massive to scare the Empire, and now they are closing their fist around the entire galaxy's neck, and the way they discuss it with such simplicity and calmness is very indicative of who they are. And again, the dialogue is just exceptional. The writing in this show is a class above everything else from Disney Star Wars. We also see Yularen again here, which is nice, and I'm glad that they managed to integrate him into the episode naturally without making it seem like a big, nostalgia bait ordeal. Oh, look, here's a character you know from the original movies, blah, blah, blah. He felt necessary to this specific moment. He felt like he was in the right place at the right time, and that is how you do fan service. We then move on to a similar situation, but it's flipped with our rebel characters, where Luthen and Mon Mothma are discussing the impact of the robbery. And again, the dialogue and the writing is just fantastic, and the performances are also sublime. We're really starting to see that maybe there's a disconnect between what Mon Mothma was expecting to happen with the rebellion and what is actually happening. And while she clearly wants to do things in a more subtle, more slow-paced way, Luthen doesn't. He doesn't care. He just wants to get this off the ground, and he's making it work, even if there are lives to pay for it. And you can feel that disconnect between these two rebellious characters, but I think it's a necessary disconnect because it's showcasing the two sides of the rebellion and how people see it. There are those who are trying to do things what is considered to be the right way through systemic and political change, and then on the flip side there are those like Luthen who are trying to change things with force, and I thought that was a nice contrast between the two characters. We then jump over to Cyril again, who's joining the Empire, I believe, doing a job that he clearly considers below his pay grade. However, he's very motivated to rectify the wrongdoings of his past, and while I said this episode doesn't really do much for him in terms of moving his story forward, it does continually establish his motivations and how I think they're going to use him in coming episodes. There's also a small little cutaway section where we learn that Val, Cassian's former leader in the rebel group, has been hired to assassinate Cassian because he knows too much. But we've learned that Val isn't really a cold-hearted killer, and it does establish a new potential story thread. We also see that Sintra survived and managed to hide from the Empire after the robbery, and I think the fact that they are showcasing her a little bit more means that we are going to get more of her in the future in regards to her story. Cassian then returns home to his mother and tells her he's done this big job, he has a load of money, and he's going to take her away and get her away. And while the droid, BMO, is very excited to be with Cassian again, and by the way, I absolutely love the droid, it's one of my favourites in Star Wars since K2SO, funnily enough, we can see that his mother, on the other hand, is very hesitant. And then we ultimately learn that she doesn't want to go. She's tired of running and hiding, and after she saw the news about the robbery and the rebellion, she feels more inclined to actually fight for her beliefs, and she wants to stay in her home and fight the Empire. Now, Cassian doesn't tell her that he was responsible for the robbery, but he is surprised, and he's still in that mindset of, well, there's nothing we can do in the grand scheme against the Empire, we just have to take what we can and run. And I think these little details are slowly building up to the point where he is going to snap and become that freedom fighter, that rebellious leader that we know. And although he does try to change her mind, he realizes that he can't, and he says he will come back at some point for her, but he then leaves. He also goes and says hello to Bix and pays her back for the things he owes her, and there's a little bit of a dynamic here, showcasing that Bix was also abused by the Imperials, and I'm looking forward to seeing more Bix because I do like her character, but there wasn't too much between the two here. Then we move forward into two separate segments that have, in my opinion, some of the best dialogue we've had in Star Wars for a long time. It starts with a party with Mon Mothma, who's essentially meeting an old friend, who she believes that she can trust, and she basically insinuates that everybody sees her in a certain way, but it's actually a front. And that she's actually been learning from Emperor Palpatine of all people in allowing people to perceive her one way so she can get away with doing something a little bit more nefarious. And I thought the acting in this entire scenario was just brilliant. And it showcased Genevieve O'Reilly's acting chops again as this character who I think is nailing the performance. And I think it's a good thing that she's finally getting the opportunity to flourish in this role. But one thing I really did enjoy overall about this episode was just the overall presentation and the set design. Even the little details like Coruscant outside of the windows of the penthouse just show how much attention to detail is being put into the show. You can see all of the cars flying, and you can see people walking in the distance on high rises and stuff. And they're just paying so much attention to this show's presentation in general. It is such a class above everything else, and it really does set a new standard. And things just continue to get better with the writing and dialogue, because then we move over to the Imperial Security Bureau again, and there is a meeting between all of them, and Deidre, the girl that we've been slowly following throughout the show, is being accused of breaking protocol and going against the laws to figure out things about the rebels that maybe these other Imperials haven't done. And despite the fact that she has been accused of breaking laws, the leader actually admires her commitment to seeking out these radical rebels. And again, the writing just flourishes, the delivery of the dialogue is just so grasping and so engaging, and she really comes across as like a predator hunting its prey, and you really feel that she's going to succeed in some way or another. And she is the perfect example of what the Empire need in contrast to what they've actually become, which harkens back to a lot of Nemec's dialogue in the previous episodes. They've become so content with their power, so strong in their belief that they are invincible that they don't notice the little details. So much so that their leadership has become complacent, and that back and forth between Blevins, the guy that's accusing her, shows this contrast brilliantly. And like I said, the leader of the Imperial Security Bureau ultimately sides with her because he knows this is what the Empire needs. They need proactiveness and they need ingenuity, otherwise the rebellion will just find a way to break through all of their rules and regulations. Now, the last segment of this show did surprise me because it was very different. They showcase what looks like a beach resort or a beach planet, and it's just something new, as I mentioned. It looked like it belonged in Star Wars, but it really did feel like something we hadn't seen before in Star Wars, because it was like a party promenade with this funky party music playing and loads of aliens and people just chilling in the sun. However, my only issue with this segment is that they move things a little bit too quickly. We see that Cassian is with a girl, and he's obviously making the most of his credits and his freedom, but it seemed like he and this girl had more of a relationship than just kind of a hookup thing. But we've literally just gone from Cassian trying to convince his mother to run away to Cassian living with this random girl on a planet, and that's my only criticism, is just the jump that seemed a little bit too quick. Even if it just was 1 or 2 extra minutes where we see Cassian landing on this planet, going to the bar and meeting this girl, trying to get away, I think it would have added some necessary connectivity. But either way, he basically leaves her for a moment to go to the shops to pick up some stuff, and a bunch of shore troopers are chasing some criminals, and obviously Cassian's getting a little bit worked up, a little bit restless, so he starts to walk just a little bit faster, and then he's pulled over by a shore trooper who basically gaslights him into believing that he's done something wrong. And he insinuates that he's a criminal because he just looks shady, and then we get what is probably the biggest cameo of the show so far, and that is Cassian being forcefully detained by a KX security droid, and he's put in jail for 6 years, and that's how the episode ends. Now, I don't know whether they're trying to imply that this KX droid that did detain Cassian is going to become K2SO. I think they're just introducing these droids into the show, so for when our K2 is introduced in some way. I could be wrong though, this could be our K2SO, but I did recall Alan Tudyk saying that he's not in this season, which leads me to believe that this just is a random droid. Who knows? They might surprise us in some way. Now again, this episode was very light on action in general, but it's so refreshing for me for a Star Wars show to be utterly carrying itself so confidently just through its writing, dialogue and performances. I really did think that maybe this week it may have stumbled without any clear direction or clear story arc, but honestly it has stayed the course and it stayed steady and it stayed strong, and I do genuinely believe it's just going to keep getting better because it hasn't stumbled at all so far. As always, if you enjoyed the review, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal, and if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to see my review of next week's episode of Andor when it goes live. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.